you all for coming tonight. I'm Gwyneth Mallon. I'm the director of the NYU Center for the Humanities, and I'm very pleased to welcome you all here this evening. And on behalf of our staff, that's Chris Alexander, Denny Valentine, Janina Soriano, Jane Tylis, and Uli Baer, we're all very happy to see you here this evening. Tonight we're going to be investigating digitization, what is lost and what is found. And to do so, we have with us tonight experts in the field of digital humanities who are going to help us think about the changing nature of access to cultural works online through digital representations. So we're going to examine issues of data loss, issues of translation to the digital, and think about what this means for research in the humanities. And to do that, we're very lucky to have Dr. Marian Thane, who's going to moderate our discussion tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce her and then basically just turn the evening over to her. So Marian Thane, who's seated here, many of you must know Marian. She teaches literature and the arts and digital humanities in liberal studies and in the Department of English at New York University. She's the Associate Director for Digital Humanities at the Faculty of Arts and Science. Her research is primarily in the areas of aestheticism, decadence, early modernism, British poetry and poetics, and technology and the production of cultural knowledge. She's published many essays and journal articles and 5 books, too many to list here, but you can see her full vita and log all that she's done in her publications. Very prolific. She's won research grants from the Arts and Humanities Research Council in the UK and from the British Academy. Before moving to NYU, she was a junior research fellow at the University of Cambridge, a senior lecturer at the University of Birmingham, and a reader at the University of Sheffield. We're so pleased that she came to join us here at NYU. Thank you, Marian. I'll turn it over to you now.
It's been such a pleasure working with Gwyneth, Chris, Denny, and the team here at the Center for Humanities over this last year. And I really want to start by thanking them and also Jane Tylis and Uli Baer, the faculty leads of the center, for welcoming me so warmly and supporting the work that I'm doing in representing NYU Digital Humanities here through the center. Before I introduce our speakers, I just want to say a brief word about NYU DH, NYU Digital Humanities. That title is starting to be used across the university for a whole plethora of initiatives around digital humanities. And here at the center, we are interested particularly in representing research from that community in various ways through the new web pages that we've got up recently. If you go to the Center for Humanities website and click on the tab for digital humanities there, the web pages will be launched officially later in this semester when we have a new blog we're going to get up and running, showcasing some of the innovative thinking in the field from faculty across the university. But already there's quite a lot of information on that site. There's a whole new page about the new cohort of NYU DH interns funded by Plonsky Foundation Scheme and the Brine Foundation Scheme. And there's a page giving details of projects, again, from across the university. So there's stuff there already and there's more stuff coming, so keep an eye on the website. There's also various projects that we're organizing here from the center. We're doing a day symposium on April the 29th. Pretty sure that's the date, it's a Friday. And that's going to be thinking about the nature of evidence supplied by computational methods in humanities research. That's something that I'm hoping to organize in collaboration with institutions across the city, and you're all warmly invited to come and join us for that. We're also running a project called Distracted Reading, which takes as its focus the kinds of acts of attention modeled for us by our students when they are checking their phone with one hand, typing an essay with the other hand, FaceTiming with their friends without any hands, and reading a book at the same time. And we're thinking of those types of acts of attention, taking that as seriously as a sort of potential pedagogical and research method, and thinking about distributed attention as a way of analyzing artifacts, analyzing works, and thinking about research methods. So that's just a few things that are starting to go on that we're doing here. Events such as this one tonight have the aim of fostering conversations from across the university. It's a great pleasure to welcome speakers from various different geographically disparate parts of NYU. And this conversation is part of a bigger conversation around digital representations. There's a working group for that involves some other members of the audience here tonight, who I hope will be joining in the discussion. And this panel, of course, is on digitization and specifically the theme, what is lost and what is found. This idea that digitization is a field dogged by narratives of loss and data lossiness. But we want also to think about what new experiences are found through that process. What can we see or hear that we haven't seen or heard before? What is brought to our attention that was not in our field of attention before that process? So each of our panelists is going to speak for about 10 minutes, and then we're going to move to a more workshop-style discussion to connect these issues with your own work, with broader issues in the field, and to give you a chance to ask questions and respond to what you hear from the panel. So let me introduce our speakers in alphabetical order, which is the order, I think, in which they're going to speak. So first of all, Sebastian Heath, who is Clinical Assistant Professor of Ancient Studies at ISAW, NYU's Institute for the Study of the Ancient World. And Professor Heath did his PhD in classical art and archaeology at the University of Michigan. And he's a field archaeologist who's worked in many Mediterranean countries with a focus on Roman pottery and the Roman economy. To quote Sebastian, he also now knows to call himself a digital humanist, although this is just the latest in a long series of labels that fit more or less well as he's worked to apply digital tools to the study and teaching of ancient material culture. He's on the university-wide Future of Technology Enhanced Education Committee, and I have to say I recently used his work on 3D modeling in a lecture that I gave on online digital archives, and it really inspired the students enormously. So I know that Professor Heath is doing great things up at 84th Street, and it's a great pleasure to have him downtown with us this evening. Second speaker, we're going to hear from them in, say, alphabetical order, Gerald Heverly, who's the subject specialist at BOBST for classics, Hellenic studies, and philosophy. His PhD was titled Neglected Warnings in the Iliad, a study in characterization. We can ask him what those neglected warnings were and attend to them later. And he's been at NYU since 2002. He's mainly interested in early Greek epic, focusing on story patterns and elements derived from folklore. His other interests include ancient political philosophy, Roman oratory, and the history of the book. He served on the APA's development committee, that's the Allied Professional Association, is that right? Of librarians, and as chair on the affiliated group with the Forum for Classics, Libraries and Scholarly Communication. In addition, he's the archivist for the Classical Association of the Atlantic States, and he's an adjunct instructor for Long Island University, where he helps train graduates preparing to enter the library profession. And Dr. Heverly is published in journals from the fields of library studies and classics, with essays including From Scroll to Database, What Do Classics Librarians Do? And a piece about the archival partnership between the University of Pittsburgh and the University of Konstanz in Germany. And he's going to be talking to us partly about broken books and the fascinating work that's happening with manuscript reconstruction. Elizabeth Hoffman is Professor of Music in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences and composes in acoustic and computer-driven media. She also writes on analysis and representation in electroacoustic and avant-garde musics, with articles in the Computer Music Journal, Organized Sound, and Perspectives of New Music. Compositional interests include a focus on timbre, texture, and spatialization as expressive signifiers. Her music appears on Empreinte Digitales, Numa, Centaur, World Edition, Capstone, Innova, and Everglade labels. Recent reviews cite her visionary sound collages, and she has received awards from the Bourges Prix Art and Pierre Schaeffer International competitions. the Seattle Arts Commission, International Computer Music Association, the Jerome Foundation, and the MacDowell Colony. She's collaborated on computer music projects over the past few years with various New York City musicians and dancers, and is currently at work on a collaborative project with live digital video to be presented in early May by NYC's Tech Week 2016. And I know she's going to talk tonight particularly about the impact of digitization on creative work, which I'm particularly excited to hear about, and which is another essential dimension to consider in thinking about the process of digitization. Thelma Thomas is Associate Professor of Fine Arts and has been in NYU's Institute for Fine Arts up on 78th Street since 2007. Her subject areas of her teaching and research interests in late antique Byzantine and Eastern Christian art range from late paganism to monastic culture, from material culture, especially textiles and dress, to wall paintings and sacred space. She's long worked in the museum world as well, beginning in graduate school, and at the University of Michigan, where she taught in the Department of Art History and curated at the Kelsey Museum of Archaeology for nearly 20 years before returning to NYU. Her next exhibition project on late antique textiles, Designing Identity, the Power of Textiles in Late Antiquity, opens at NYU's Institute for the Study of the Ancient World in late February 2016. I'm looking forward to that. And I'm delighted again that Thelma has come downtown from the IFA to be with us tonight, and I'm particularly pleased that she'll be talking to us about technology and her work with textiles, and underrepresented media in the discussion of digitization. And she's also talking about technology that gives a really interesting and unusual spin on ideas of digitization, thinking about reflective transformation imaging. So you can see that we have a panel on digitization, but not necessarily digitization as we used to know it. And I hope tonight will give you all different perspectives in thinking about this topic. So over to our first speaker now, Sebastian.
My topic is digitizing a third dimension that is really about creating 3D models. That's working the title of the panel towards what I want to talk about, which is creating 3D models. I will also, in my few slides, try to overlap with the concepts of finding things and losing things, and you'll see where I'm stretching that or not, but we should all feel free to stretch that and see what happens. I'm up here because a couple of years ago, I suddenly noticed that it was possible to go into museums and to use a phone. This is a 6 Plus, so I didn't have this phone, but I had my regular phone. Take pictures of objects, and then either on cloud-based tools or on software that you can get for $70, which is not quite free, but sort of close to free, load those pictures into these machines and get back a good 3D model of the object that you're pointing at. And here in one slide, I'm trying to cover all of that. So you see these are little thumbnails of the pictures that I have taken. These blue shapes here, rectangles, parallelograms, whatever my middle school children would call them, those represent the computer having figured out where I was holding the camera. And the exceedingly important thing is that I had to do nothing other than say, computer, run over these, find overlap, and create a virtual world that shows that recreates where I was holding it, and then establishes the object that was in front of me as I was moving it around. So again, 10 minutes could be spent on photogrammetry, and Thelma and I have spent far more than that talking about it. What did I lose? A tremendous amount of time. There is no doubt about that. It takes a long time to do. There is a craft to this. I say, oh, you just throw it into the computer. Well, you end up realizing that you've missed little bits, and it does. What do you find? It is an interesting way of looking at objects, trying to cover everything that you can to provide a view for the computer that it can reconstruct the whole thing. So it is absolutely an interesting way, it's an interesting experience of looking at objects. Somewhere between finding and losing, I've become more aware in the last couple of years that as technology is changing very rapidly, we have multiple opportunities to lose our previous identities as digital humanists and become new ones because of the skills that we pick up. So what do we find? We find new capabilities within ourselves. We find new opportunities for ourselves as scholars as we are digitizing these things. Again, maybe that's a little bit of a stretch, but I hope that somebody picks that up and we can talk about that more perhaps. What are the outcomes of this, all the loss of time that I talked about in terms of figuring out how to do this and the taking the pictures and the having it fail and then redoing it again, blah, 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 blah. Well, one of the most immediate ones that I can point to is in my teaching. So I teach, when I teach undergraduates, I teach Roman archaeology. I've taught at Gallatin a course called Rome, a visual and virtual empire, in which I had them creating things. I'm doing just a sort of more standard Roman archaeology class. Some of you guys, not going to click on it live because this computer seems a little slow. It's a digital humanities talk. You saw under the hood earlier that I was loading some of these things. So here is a portrait of the Emperor Augustus. It's not letting me zoom in, and that reminds me to touch the screen over here. I'll explain that later. But basically, I have my students, I teach them to identify coins. This is a coin down here. I then throw them at a bunch of 3D models. The first thing which they learn to do is to, turn it to the side and go, I can see that coin is that portrait. I'm not going to go through the whole assignment. Again, under 10 minutes. But there is no information on these 3D models. It is their job to go and identify them, and I have given them the tools to do that, and they seem to enjoy it. So very quickly, what have I lost in doing that? I'm reasonably sure that while the model of my being in the room with my students is valid, I'm not that, but that this whole idea of the future of technology enhanced education, whether or not we're enhancing our education, we need to be keeping up with our students in terms of the type of media they expect us to be bringing into class and the ways we can engage with them. They seem to enjoy working with 3D models, which is good because I enjoy it too. And then we get in a back and forth being excited, and we have fun talking about both the technology and the outputs, and they're learning about the Roman Empire and coins and emperors and all this kind of stuff through 3D models. And that is just a good. We're just keeping up with the Joneses being our students, and they're ahead of this. Except I'll tell you, they're good at using data, they're not good at creating it. And so it's that Gallatin course where I try to work in teaching them how to create things. And so that's where, what have we lost? Hopefully some sense of stability in what happens in the classroom, and that we're willing to experiment and try things and whatever. All that kind of stuff. How am I doing on time, Mary?
You are fine.
Great. Wonderful. Okay, so moving ahead. I'm also a field archaeologist. I work at a site in Kenkria in Greece, which is near Corinth. Another more than 10-minute segue that I will not take you on. But that's a site where one of my main roles is to go into material that was excavated in the 1960s and bring it into the world in perhaps a more comprehensive fashion. If there are other archaeologists in the room or people who work on archives, the first pass at the final publication, you always go back and find that there's more to say, both because we're thinking about different things, and then we're more interested in sharing more stuff. So 3D in my so I preloaded that. I think I can go right here. Yeah, same image, but things should be reasonably preloaded. So this is, what was that? This is a page on a website, kenkria.org, where we are trying, again, to share the information that we have. And here you see a statue base, and so cool. Let me rotate things around. I won't try and zoom in. You've seen that before already, blasé. You should come to expect this from archaeologists. If there are archaeologists not intrigued by 3D, they're behind the cutting edge, or they're behind professional practice, because this is a better representation of this object than just a 2D image. And I welcome pushback on that, and we can talk about that more. Okay, what I am also trying to do is to place that object and a good representation on it, the best representation of it that I can do, that I can create right now, in the context of its original excavation. And so I don't know if you can read this, but underlined is oval-shaped marble, if I come back, hopefully I haven't lost, base, oval-shaped marble base. This is the 1964 notebook page of the day that object was found, and placing it in its archaeological context. Again, links that I will not follow to stay within 10 minutes. What am I losing here? Or what I'm trying to desperately, as fast as I can, put aside myself as an intermediary between everybody who might be interested and the original materials itself. Obviously, digitization comes with issues. There will always be a desire, perhaps a scholarly need, to go into the museum at Isthmia near Kenkriai and actually see that object. I'm not trying to actually replace that, but I am trying to do the best that I can. I am trying to take myself out of the middle, to disempower myself as a controller of the information, and to get it out there, and to use digitization for that, and really to say, here's a good picture of the object. Here's the records that were created. That trench has been destroyed. Archaeology is destruction. It no longer exists. So I can actually come pretty close to giving you the same experience of working with that material as I have as a member of the project and as an insider. So intentionally trying to lose any control over this material is one of the things that I am trying to do. In my opening remarks that were shared amongst us, I don't know whether they went out publicly or not, I raised the issue of publication. How am I doing on time? I raised the issue of publication. And so what you see here, I was approached by what was called the APA, now the SCS. We've changed our name, the Society for Classical Studies, which is our professional association. Hey, Sebastian, do you have anything you want to publish? I'm like, yes, I do. That model that I showed you of that oval base, I made that in May of this year and put it online, but also I made it here. I made it right here. Let me click here. I made it using a scanner. It costs about, I think it was $500 total, including the iPad. So using low-cost hardware for 3D scanning at Kenkriai, Greece. Wrote up this note in somewhere between newsletter / peer-reviewed journal. I say that because I really didn't mind the venue in which I was getting this out, as long as it was an organization that was going to be willing to publish it quickly, get it out there so that people could see what was going on and decide if they wanted to do similar things themselves. I note that this is a screen dump of the PDF version, in which these things show up in black and white, and it's really, I tried it. You click on that piece of paper and absolutely nothing happens. But if you go, it is also published online, and that's where you can see it in color, click through, get bigger versions of it, click through to that interactive model, click through to the archival version of the website that we're putting on, all that kind of stuff. So what am I don't know whether I am losing by putting my precious scholarship into merely the newsletter of my professional association, but I know what I'm gaining, which is rapid publication and wide reach, and people responding to it very quickly and getting excited about it and telling me that they're sending it to they're assigning it to their students. So digitization as as rapid outreach to people, letting you know what's going on, that's certainly something that we gain. I don't think I'm saying anything new there. I have 10 minutes, so I'm going to choose to be, profoundly optimistic and then see how people respond to that. But yeah, I'm trying to put that into practice. I also gain truly and absolutely a sense of play and a sense of playing out in public and seeing how that lets me engage with people and what I can do. So here is a tweet. I actually didn't preload this one, and I should be able to recreate that for you. A $200 Chromebook lets me interact with 3D models by hand. What have I lost? Any sense of embarrassment about including an apostrophe in the "let's" in that tweet? You know, whatever. I really don't mind. Imperfect but fairly inexpensive and kind of and kind of cool. So here I have. Whoops. Hopefully, will it work? Please. All right. I'll probably just send around. I'm not going to send this around now because I don't want to distract things from other speakers. But this is three, and it's working up there. Great, $300 Chromebook, which hopefully it'll keep going. $300 Chromebook in which I can load these 3D models on, and with any luck. Things are going a little haywire now, but come up to me afterwards, and I will do the best that I can to put this object in your hands and let you play with it. That one right there. I'll point it there. That one that's on the screen. So I'll do the best that I can using low-cost hardware. Yes, this could happen in fancy labs that cost $10,000, $20,000, numbers that are entirely unavailable to most of my peers in archaeology. I like to work with low-cost things. The best that I can do to put it in your hand, however, and that's a gain, that's something that we found, but what I found that I was losing was any sense that this technology was recreating an ancient experience of this object. Nobody went and picked this up in their hands and moved it around. They only looked at it. However, it is actually useful. I know more about the details of this portrait head in the Metropolitan Museum because I can stand here and sit here, whatever it is I'm doing, manipulate it and zoom it in and out. But really, I quickly realized in this endeavor that I'm not recreating the past, but I'm creating a different approach to it. And unfortunately, after all saying for access and everything like that, one of the most fun things to do is to take a model like this and be next to the object itself and be able to move it around and then physically check it against the thing. So digitization does not release you from opportunities to learn things by engaging with the original. That will always be the case. So there's no perfect replacement of the original. So we're not losing that. If you're a museum, you're still going to have people wanting to come see your objects, whatever, all that kind of stuff. I will stop there. And hopefully I'm under whatever, around 10 minutes. But that's that. So what I've gained, a sense of play, a sense of willingness to just try things, not being particularly concerned about the venue that I get it out, as long as I'm getting it out, whether it's Twitter or other more or less formal publications, and then truly assuming that I'm going to be a different digital humanist / different scholar, because some new technology is going to come along, and as long as it costs, under $200, I'm going to sit there and try it and try and get my colleagues to do it as well. So, that's all. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Marion, for the introduction. Our panel is discussing what's lost and what's found as a result of digitization. As a partial answer to the question, what is found, I'm going to discuss the Broken Books Project, an effort to digitally reconstruct medieval manuscript books that are no longer intact. The pursuit surely is worthwhile. If we believe it's valuable to reconstruct ancient pottery or the skeletons of dinosaurs, then why not significant books from the Middle Ages as well? There's a long history of dismembering medieval manuscripts. Soon after the invention of printing, many manuscripts of works that had made it into print were cut up and used as binding material for products of the new technology. In the 19th century, John Ruskin, art critic and collector, dismembered medieval manuscripts for their illustrations, claiming he had no interest in the texts themselves. An article in the New Yorker from 2014 discusses recent instances of dismembering or breaking medieval manuscripts acquired at auction in order to increase the resale value of the parts. One of the most spectacular broken manuscripts is the Languedoc Breviary, a luxury book produced in Italy around 1450. It originally consisted of more than 500 leaves. The manuscript eventually made its way to the Languedoc estate in Wales, hence its name. In 1958, it was purchased by Goodspeeds of Boston, who subsequently dismembered it and sold the leaves separately. Having a sense of the manuscript as a whole is crucial for understanding it as a significant cultural artifact, but reassembling its leaves would be impossible. Not all of them are accounted for, and reuniting them even temporarily would prove very difficult logistically and financially. The only practical solution is to try to reconstruct the Languedoc Breviary through digital imaging of its known components. The Broken Books Project, inaugurated at St. Louis University, aims to do just this. The project's organizers are actively gathering existing images of the breviary's leaves, along with descriptive information about each. All the data is arranged on an Omeka site and is freely available. Using shared canvas technology, the project will also allow members of the public to contribute images and information, including cataloging metadata, about previously undiscovered leaves of the Languedoc Breviary. In these ways, the Broken Books Project aims to reconstruct the original manuscript virtually. And I'll pause to show you some pictures. So this is the main site. Oops. Oh my. Sorry about that. I think I just closed it out. All right. Okay. While it finishes loading, the Languedoc estate was inhabited, may still well be, by people from the Rolls family, as in Rolls-Royce. So the place is associated not only with high-end books, but also with high-end cars. That's what the car at the top is all about. The way the site is laid out, it's organized, the material that's been captured so far is organized according to the traditional divisions in a breviary. So you have information about the calendar telling you what observances are to be held on what days. You have the proper of the seasons, called temporale, the different seasons like Advent or Lent or that sort of thing. You have the Psalter, the collection of the Psalms. You have the Sanctorale that deals with the information you need pertaining to the celebration of particular saints' days, and so on. So I picked the section on the Sanctorale, the information pertaining to saints' days, because it has the most images and a wide variety of them. I know you can't see these images in detail. That doesn't matter for my purposes right now as I scroll through them. Just take a look at the variety. Okay, so you have some that are in color. You have some that are in black and white. You have some that are only part of a leaf or part of a page. There as well. You have some where the contrast is pretty good, some where it's really not good at all, and some where it's pretty horrible. Okay. We'll talk about that in a minute. For any of these leaves, if you click on the leaf, you will get the description that lies behind it. This is the metadata. Okay. This gives you information about the object itself, what it is, what the dimensions of it are, what the provenance of it was. That's pretty easy if it all comes from the same book, or usually it is, and so on. This sort of thing that you would find in a catalog record, generally speaking. And then at the bottom, as a treat for your patience, if it loads, this is one of the more lush pages in the manuscript. So now you get an idea why people were tempted to chop this thing up. Okay, not every page in this manuscript looks as beautiful as this page, but this gives you a sense of the deluxe nature of the production and why it was tempting to sell it in pieces. Laudable though the project is behind this, it and any project like it will face several obstacles. First, there's the issue of copyright. Medieval manuscripts themselves are much too old to be covered by US copyright law, but images of them aren't. This includes plates in printed books, images that Sebastian produces with his cell phone when he's going around museums, and so on. Basically, whoever produces an image has the copyright to it according to US law. The creators of the Broken Books Project are well aware of this, but many members of the public who will contribute images they've found online won't be aware. This means that the project will have to vet the copyright status of contributed images before posting them, which will be time-consuming and difficult in some cases. Furthermore, the quality of the images can be expected to vary a lot, as we just saw. Images gathered from existing online projects, such as Digital Scriptorium, will be professionally produced and meet nationally recognized standards of quality. By contrast, images contributed from eBay, for example, will often be the work of amateurs with little or no knowledge of digital imaging standards. The same disparity will be seen in descriptive information or metadata. Descriptions of leaves produced by librarians will follow one set of standards. Descriptions produced by medievalists will often follow another, and those contributed by members of the general public may well follow none. Thus, the staff of the Broken Books Project will likely spend much time normalizing the description that it finds or receives. This could range from how measurements are recorded. Are you going to use inches or centimeters? To terms used for specific passages of the breviary. Will you call something the prayer of the day or the collect of the day? Either expression is correct, but you're going to have to choose. Indeed, controlled vocabulary is a common enough issue for digital projects that a brief digression about the topic seems in order. By controlled vocabulary, I mean an organized arrangement of words and phrases used to index content. Controlled vocabulary typically includes preferred and variant terms and has a defined scope or describes a specific domain. Internal consistency in the system and minimal ambiguity are essential. Some widely used systems of controlled vocabulary are the Library of Congress subject headings for books and the Getty's Art and Architecture Thesaurus for items of material culture. Probably the best-known system of controlled vocabulary is the Latin taxonomy used in the life sciences. If a digital project consisting of a large collection of related objects is going to be successful, its creators will have to think a lot about controlled vocabulary. Otherwise, efficient, quick searching of the collection will be compromised. You'll always have to wonder whether you've found all the objects pertaining to the author, the subject, or the other characteristic that might interest you. Besides the practicalities of copyright, image quality, and controlled vocabulary, virtual reconstruction of a medieval book has some inherent limitations. Depending on how the book's leaves were excised, today they might reveal nothing about the sewing that held them together or the composition of the book's signatures. Digitization cannot remedy this gap. Information about a manuscript's binding, which can also be very instructive, also lies beyond the reach of digitization to recover, usually. Moreover, a digital image gallery will not give you a good sense of what it must have been like to leaf through a manuscript, to hold it in your hands, or to see it as a physical whole. Virtual reconstruction of the Languedoc Breviary and of other medieval manuscripts is thus an ideal, although certainly one worth trying to approximate. Thank you for your attention.
I've already been so inspired by the two previous speakers that I've had at least 3 new ideas for talk themes about all sorts of interesting things that I haven't thought about in a systematic way. I'm going to turn on my digital phone and not bother Marion with asking her if I'm under time, but I prepared comments on general themes more so than on my own work, which focuses on quite a lot on writing computer music, but I don't do that exclusively, and I also teach in a department where there's a lot of other much more broadly based activities in music. So I'd like to make a few comments, if I can get this low enough, since I'm so much shorter than everybody else here, about some general themes in terms of digitization and the impact that it's had on music studies as a larger discipline. I think it's a fascinating question, the lost and found framework, and I couldn't think of too many things that were specifically one-sided. Let me backtrack for a moment and just say that one thing that occurred to me listening to Gerald speak was that in my own field of work, what was perhaps 20 years ago when I was in graduate school a specialty, digital music, has become a norm through the change in technology and through the embracing of these technologies in academia. So beginning with the fact that computer music or electronic music used to be a specialty, it used to be only practiced at certain institutions. Now the fact that it can be practiced by 3-year-olds on the train with a notepad, the practice of creativity in terms of the world of sound has changed very profoundly. I had a note to refer to to a paradigm, an outline by Baudrillard that I thought was perhaps prescient. I was trying to pull together some of my own thoughts for today, and I like. I'm persuaded by his 3 orders of simulacra, moving that an observation that we've moved from a state in which I believe he calls this the pre-modern, in which we had reality and we had images, we had replicas, and we could sense pretty easily the separation between them. We moved then to a second order in which the real was surrounded by a proliferation of all sorts of copies, and that also caused a proliferation of very interesting theorists and thinkers on art and authenticity and et cetera, et cetera. And now if we believe that we've moved past that stage into the current information or postmodern age, where we don't quite have a grasp on what's happening because everything is moving so fast, Baudrillard asserts that the representation itself perhaps in many cases precedes and determines the real. And I think that's a very kind of earth-shattering phenomenon. There's a few examples I thought of while listening to my esteemed colleagues here speak, and one was ways in which things can be created on computer. Musical compositions can be altered using digital technology in a way that makes the representation seem real, but it's not real. One interesting example, I can think of this the first time I encountered this phenomenon was when I was in graduate school, and I remember one of my professors came into the computer music lab, and he had just recorded a saxophonist, and he wasn't happy with the technical virtuosity of the player, and so he had gone into the sound file and had taken out a few milliseconds from every note, in between every note. So the player, it suddenly turned from a VW to a Rolls Royce in terms of the speed and virtuosity. And so then what happens in the feedback loop when players coming after that are confronted with this recording and have to meet up with what we're then led to believe is the state of the art or the true piece as the composer wants it. So there's a whole lot of interesting paradoxes that are part of this whole work-play cycle in which we create things, we experiment, and then they come back to haunt us in the human realm. And we don't quite know how I think in general, we don't quite know how the digital technologies are affecting our sense of perception, relationship to each other, our communication skills, our memories, ability to remember things. Before the printing press, we by doing things that are not digital, not pushing buttons, I believe neurologists know that it affects our brains when we locate something using a map or using Siri. Those are different processes. They have different effects on our circuitry. I have a couple notes scribbled to just run through an outline of what is happening in the field of music in terms of how the digital revolution has affected music studies. And I came up with 4 basic areas. One, digital music instruments. So we've moved from a state where most instruments that we knew and played and studied and as part of traditions that were taught by master teachers often, they've been supplemented and in some cases, in some situations, almost replaced by digital music instruments. And the digital music instruments are accompanied by digital music instrument interfaces and on, because once you replace something that's been built and developed to live in the physical, in a completely different Newtonian universe, how do we construct something from our imaginaries? And a lot of the digital instruments have interfaces that replicate the old styles of technology, whether it be amplifiers, so you might have a digital panel that has dials and wheels, but you just touch it, or new sorts of instruments that are modeled on game players, or a student of mine last year created a musical composition using as a video game. I don't have this at home, but the games where you interact with a terminal to get exercise. What's that called? Yeah, a Wii controller. No, it's not a Wii controller. It's a golf game. So it has long chords and you do things like this. And he turned it into a very expressive composition, which almost looks choreographic, totally misapplying the technology. So there's digital music instruments, digital scores, the phenomenon of being able to notate music as a digital file is tremendously powerful and also terribly inhibiting because how many of you have ever created a music score using Finale or Sibelius? The fact that the software programs quickly became so monopolized and standardized is another related issue that's somewhat interesting. But the choices, once you go digital, are increasingly standardized. So I'd say that as a general theme, one of the dangers or caveats I see of this sweeping move toward digitization in the creative sound world is standardization, and a couple other things, reduction of experience, repeatability, which could be either a plus or a minus. But if you have a digital score, it's very easy to cut and paste. It's very easy to move things around. And so it becomes very seductive in terms of influencing the creative process. But in the large areas, I think I'm almost out of time because as a composer, I have no sense of time. There are 2 big themes in the field in the practice of music, two big parameters that most composers confront and deal with, and one is time and one is frequency. I'm interested in something that's a combination of both of them, called timbre, which is how we know the difference between a violin and a cello. So how the complex combination of sound pattern over time, the different weighted elements of that sound enable us to distinguish different sources and different what we call qualitative elements in sound. But time in music has become digitized in the software we use, in the way we use devices to help us make music. And I found this. I'm surprised that I still have it. I don't know why I've hung on to it, but if you've never seen this, this is a timekeeper, musical timekeeper. I did a quick Wikipedia search to check when the first one was actually created, and metronomes date from 1581, when Galileo developed the pendulum. They continued to develop through the late 1970s, when the digital metronome was introduced. But I guarantee that if you know, a music student going to a store today is not going to gravitate toward one of these. It's charming, but it makes an acoustic sound. And so one of the things we've lost through the digitization of music is that a lot of the sounds we hear are coming from speakers and not from a resonator box. And I also did a quick search. I think I have 2 minutes left. I'm going to start speaking more quickly. So I did a quick search for digital metronomes just to see whether this question of lost and found was dealt with on any sales pages. And I did find one, and it says something for a QuickTime QT3 metronome, which looks like a little black box with a circle on it. And the pros are you can set it to increments of 1 beat per minute for total accuracy if you are trying to find and play the exact tempo of a recording. So this device, you can't control at that level. It only goes, you can only move it in the increments that the notches allow. So if you're an experimental composer and you want to compose a piece in a tempo of 93.5 seconds per second, you can't hear that on here, but you can hear it on a digital metronome. The cons are the click is very loud and there is no volume adjustment. What looks like a wheel isn't. It would be great to have a wheel and just turn to the required tempo instead of having to push buttons. For this reason, I'm considering the amazing, etc., etc. And they send you to a psycho product. So also with pitch, standardization began in the 18th century. Those of you who know what tuning forks are may or may not know that there were hundreds of them. Every town in Europe had its own organ with its own standardized pitch that singers would tune to. They had their own tuning forks. I know a German composer, installation artist in Berlin who did a whole sound installation based on hundreds and hundreds of tuning forks that he found in an archive in a museum. I believe it had something to do with a lineage from a project that Mahler was actually involved in. And the fact is that standardization was local, so there was a sense of community around tuning and around the idea of specificity that was adapted to particular local exigencies. This is, I couldn't find my tuning fork, but I found an old, whatever it is. It's called a chromatic pitch instrument master key. And so if I blow on it, it makes a pitch. and that's supposed to be 440. It says, I only know that because it says on the cover here that it's 440 vibrations a second. But why? Why do we all have to agree that A is 440? So those are two big areas. I'm out of time, but I'll just point to the two other areas. Digital storage and digitization of music as data are two big areas. Music as data is called, and when it's utilized for applied purposes, it's called music information retrieval. And there's quite a lot of research that's going on about in that field, and that relates to searchability and the fact that maybe that's the negative side. The positive side, to echo both of my colleagues here, is that there's the world is at the fingertips of my students in terms of repertoire, score libraries, primary sources that have been scanned with notations from the original creators. So again, it's a very complicated mixed bag, and it's an exciting time to be creating music.
But I have to say, I'm the imposter in the room. I'm an object-oriented art historian, and my interest in new digital technologies stems mainly from my interests in the documentation of materials, physical features, techniques, visual effects. I have no special or any other expertise in digital technology, no special research projects based in digital technology. I am, however, eager to build a toolkit for thinking with, and to complement current tools for illustration and written description. Ideally, visual and written art historical texts work together in furthering analysis and argumentation. Still photographs are limiting. Study photographs are often taken under less than ideal conditions. Here, a snapshot of a Byzantine compound woven silk in the collection of Dumbarton Oaks in Washington, D.C., taken, as is typical, through plexiglass and under fluorescent lights. So the plexi and the lights account for the milky reflections you see. However, we can still see details of fabric structure, weaving anomalies, and damage. Even perfect studio photography, under ideal conditions, does not provide much more useful information about fabric structure or condition or texture, or more ephemeral qualities of luster or color varying under changing light conditions. My visual and physical analyses address such questions, so I take a lot of oddly angled photographs, and I draw, as I have done since I was a grad student many years ago. Actually, let's turn that off, the sound off. Raking light provided by a flashlight in one hand and an iPhone in the other for this shaky video reveal much more about texture and help me interpret my still photos. I thank the sympathetic curator at Dumbarton Oaks, John Hansen, and postdoctoral fellow Elizabeth Williams for turning off the lights, collection storage, and holding the silk up so that I could do this experiment a couple of years ago. And I hope that we can use professional videos in the online catalog of the textile collection. Now, if I can't experiment with spatial experience, movement, lighting, then I'm not as open to perceiving the artwork or the monument in space and time, let alone describing spatial temporal phenomena and making you see them. So here, an image of a wool compound weave that is the same weaving technique as the previous piece that was more finely executed in silk. But this one is not under glass, so it's possible to take photos for computational photography. In the past couple of years, I've started to learn about computational photography, first using my iPhone, and thanks to the patience of Sebastian, so I know now how to take source photos for computational photography in just about any storeroom or field situation where the surface is not covered with some kind of reflective material like plexiglass. Right. So as you've heard and seen now, one of my research subjects is archaeological textiles of late antiquity, a period spanning the 3rd to the 7th, 8th centuries or thereabouts. And as you might imagine, textiles that old are not always in great condition, and damage obscures features. However, the tools of computational photography are designed to enhance difficult-to-see features and promise terrific utility for study and teaching, especially for close comparisons, for example, of these two 5-color compound weaves. So I'll focus on one technique that is particularly promising for the study of archaeological textiles, reflectance transformation imaging, or RTI, thanks to open source software as developed for use by art conservators, archaeologists, and art historians by the nonprofit organization Cultural Heritage Imaging. I'll share one example I'm using to learn about the possibilities of RTI. Oh, this is mine. RTI images, excuse me. Here's the one with the diagram. RTI images allow me to see surface structure in more detail than conventional still photographs and capture features of the weave in ways that a conventional still photograph cannot. And although a diagram can represent internal structure more clearly, a diagram also renders the textile more generically. So we lose some of the defining characteristics of the artifact. Now, I can view, let's see if that works. Oh, the media is not found. I can view the textile in different conditions from afar without subjecting the textile to handling, which is always destructive. For RTI, you move the light around instead of the object, and that's what this video would have shown you. So subjecting textile artifacts to long exposure to light might damage them, fading colors, for example. But this allows sustained viewing away from the artifact under changeable lighting conditions. RTI combines raking light from multiple systematically selected angles, and this view is a default mode. The views can be manipulated in the control panel by preset algorithms for particular enhancements shown in the viewing panel. Oh, I see this. Just trying to change the slide at this point. There we go. The lighting can be arranged by a dome made specifically for this technique. It's expensive and a lot for a solo researcher to carry. But ideally, what it helps you to do is to create a series of photographs with lighting angles similar to the pattern shown here. This pattern here, and then here. The lighting can be arranged by a handheld flash and a string for measuring the distance. And that's what the student Emily Frank is doing in that image there. That's how I learned as well, thanks to Michelle Marincola of the Conservation Center of the Institute of Fine Arts, who organized for us a private class for one afternoon, just one afternoon, taught by the RTI expert from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Ashira Loiki. And this was much easier to schedule than a workshop of several days at the Cultural Heritage Imaging place in California, and much cheaper too. But another cost-saving option for the New York, certainly the NYU art historical community, would be a boot camp for a group of scholars. I also thank this Conservation Center student, Emily Frank, who introduced me to RTI when she was taking one of my courses, and who is pioneering the use of RTI on archaeological textiles and textile impressions, as presented in the article from which I took this set of images. And what she's doing is really exciting. I'm just going to show you a couple of reflectance transformations to give you a sense of the available enhancements. Oh, here, this one works. This viewing mode, diffuse gain, enhances surface detail. Diffuse gain makes the surface more sensitive to variations in lighting, allowing better focus on particular features such as differences in texture or how tightly the thread was spun, and closer comparison across different threads in a given textile, for example, which might yield information about different hands at work involved in the production process. Image unsharp masking increases edge contrast. For textiles, this means that individual filaments stand out more clearly. Specular enhancement enhances perception of the surface by adding specular reflectance highlights. And when I remove the color, I can see surface shapes much more clearly. I'm learning to work with these and other viewing modes listed in this drop-down menu. And all of this is helpful to me as I learn more about fibers and weave structures, which I do as I explore and learn to make the program serve my purposes. Although I won't be able to get RTI-worthy digital images for a piece under plexiglass, I can compare what I see in a related work. And of course, all of the photographic techniques I've mentioned, from still photography to video to RTI, can be used together to complement each other. What's gained? Obviously, immense amounts of visual information that can be mined until the viewer no longer supports the old file format. Individual access to dynamic imaging of materials and structures. And RTI is open source, so potentially anyone can download the viewer and view files shared with them. In an ideal world, then, I could share not just information, but also the experience of exploration with colleagues. Enhanced and sometimes new perceptions of the textile artifact, consequently new ways of thinking about the physical reality of the artifact. This may lead to new vocabularies, new modes of characterization, perhaps new ways of thinking about it entirely, new epistemologies. I think that this is an important part of the future of art history, at least for the first-order documentation required for artifacts. And it reminds me of turn of the 20th century experiments in photographic reproduction for art historical research. What is lost? We lose a guarantee of enduring access to information, as enduring as a printed or digital photograph. Technology keeps changing, as we've all been saying, and disappearing. Our work disappears. But I think because cultural heritage imaging is institutional rather than corporate, this RTI format is likely to continue for a while. It's important to remember that, as with a photograph, that we're not looking at the actual artifact. We're always translating the visual experience into a simulated material world. So RTI, photography of any kind, does not replace interaction, the intimacy of physical observation and how we learn physically with the artifact. The RTI files use many photographs and are enormous, and this leads to some of my main questions and concerns. How should I archive my data-rich projects, and where? There may be institutional resources that I'm unaware of. If so, then someone please tell me. Thank you.
You all talked about what is lost and found, and I was wondering how you are teaching those ways of seeing in your classroom. I'm a humanities professor here too, and one thing I'm trying to get my students to do is proactively question the media format so that they can do the deconstruction that you're all talking about, and how do you tie that into your pedagogy as well as your research?
Is this on? Okay. I'll start because I'm not going to have that much to say, but what I like to do is really to introduce my students to different ways of doing things, because I'm never going to be expert in any of these, but I do want to keep up with what the possibilities are, and they will actually understand some of these much more than I do, and I hope that they'll start to take up some of these techniques as well.
So I think on a practical basis, on a practical basis, I would I do ask my students to think that there are sort of no limits to digital humanities projects. And so to think of any representation that they're seeing as the distinction between a closed world and an open world. So a map is, it may not include topography. It may not have a topography specifically on it, but that does not mean that there isn't topography in that part of the world. And so getting students to think about any digital representation that they have is probably very, very incomplete. These are things that we can say about any representation, as Thelma stressed. A lot of the technique, a lot of the critical techniques that one brings to bear on digital media are the same that one brings to bear on printed paper things, on narrative discourse, whatever all that is. And so that's one thing to absolutely stress to students, and I'm sure you do. It doesn't, one brings a critical awareness to these things, no matter what. But I think in the courses where I'm able to get students to create things, it is much easier to get them to think about those kinds of issues themselves. And so I return to one of the points that I made, like pedagogy as creation, I think is one of the opportunities that digitization provides. And I would welcome, your experience, you bringing into the room your experiences with that as well.
I also want to say I send my students to Sebastian.
I'd like to sort of echo some of what Sebastian said, but with a sort of characteristic library take on it. So for the most part, when we do library instruction, it's a single meeting with a class, maybe for an hour, maybe an hour and a half at most. What we tend to do is take more or less a generic approach when it comes to introducing people to how to locate information and how to evaluate it. So in that sense, we're kind of format blind. It's generic. We have a page on the library website that tells you how to evaluate printed sources like books. We have a page that tells you how you can evaluate websites and other electronic sources. The evaluation criteria are practically the same on both. And that's because, as Sebastian said, critical evaluation of information, regardless of the format, boils down to a lot of the same kinds of questions. So for us, there's not a lot of distinction. But that also has to do with the fact that we have people for maybe an hour, or as I said, an hour and a half at most.
I think I could answer that question in the context of just a refrain of referring to computer representations of sound. I didn't bring my computer with me, but there's a lot of open source programs that allow students who even are not composers or are not studying how to create digital sound to record material, and virtually everyone has a walking recorder in their pocket now, and to analyze it and to understand by looking at the features with some assistance in explaining what they're looking at in terms of the sound spectrum, just like Thelma can use technology to look at light spectrum. I can show students the same thing, and that can help them to be more attentive to what they're hearing. And what's prevalent now using digital plugins can still be, I still teach graduate students to do some of those things using a more Luddite coding technique, so they can then understand what's beneath the hood of the car that they're, and begin to tune in to something that's lost by using generic software, and appreciate that when they use a digital software program, they're not using something that's natural, that's there's nothing imminent about it. Someone wrote it and it reflects a particular algorithm that's doing a particular, having a particular effect on the sound. And if they want something different, then we talk about ways to do that. So that sensitizes them to the fabrication of the interface.
I wonder if we might turn the question back to someone. Do you have anything you want to say about that in terms of your own practice?
Yeah. I mean, My concern to convey to my students, I mean, there's often the term the digital natives, but I've found in my work, or like the last 10 years doing this, is that they usually come more digital naives. They consume a lot without questioning. And I've done RTI and photogrammetry, and they're powerful tools, but there's so much going underneath the hood that they don't know. And I think it's different from printing and books, where that is actually a more material thing that we can probably relate to. The algorithmic coding stuff, like your point in the music, is so complex, and we're handing over a lot to, like, especially when we're not in the back end working on the tools, we're handing over a lot, and we're getting caught into the procession of simulacra and all these concerns that the Baudrillard quote brings up. But it's so hard to get it into the class, right? Because if you've got your content, you're trying to get the tools. And I was just curious how each of you try to broach that in some way. I get to teach a whole class about it, so I'm teaching digital humanities courses specifically, so I get to delve into it more. But it's hard to kind of cross that gap. And so I'm just curious the things you're doing.
Could I just what does it mean when you say at NYU you teach a digital humanities course? As Marion said, I'm up on East 84th Street, and NYU is such a dispersed and crazy place, and so I'm very excited to hear somebody standing up and saying, I teach a digital humanities course, but maybe there are other people in the room who are interested. What does that mean? What's the elevator?
My title is Clinical Assistant Professor of Digital Humanities in the Draper program. And I teach 2 courses this year for the first time that are core courses in digital humanities. One is a semester on databases and networks, and next semester will be on analysis and visualization. And my class is here. Those 3 up there and 1 back there. So.
Thanks to everyone. I'm Richard Jordan, guilty as charged. I was formerly, many years ago, worked in the Bopst Library Acquisitions Department and was a student of Blumentrell's in the Classics Department as well. With a question for Professor Heath. Could you take us through a little bit more on what you actually do in front of an object? Do you go around it? Do you photograph one side of it? Does the program then assume certain things about the shape of the object, or what do you have to do in order to get the turning of the object?
So just as technique, that line between technique and craft, what really matters is overlap between the images. That's what allows the math, and I am not a particularly sophisticated mathematician and one does not need to be, but it is providing overlap that the computer goes and uses image recognition techniques. I shouldn't even go into it at all. But what you get is that if you have enough overlap between your images, you get that view of the blue rectangles, perspective rectangles around your object. So you have to go all the way around it. It means that if you're in a museum and an object is against the wall, you can't make a model of that. So you're actually as a sort of not quite guerrilla model maker, but as an informal model maker, though I have found, I have yet to be told I can't do it. In the Met, in the Getty, around, lots of places just say, guards look at me funny, but I behave as a person who's not going to touch the object. Once they figure it out, they don't mind that I'm taking 60 pictures of the object. So yes, you just go around. It takes a while. Does that answer? Yeah. Good. But you have to you have to go above it and around and all that kind of stuff. And if it's a 2nd century AD emperor with really fancy hair, you're not going to capture all that information. Though that's where the craft part, without meaning to pat myself on the back, I've gotten pretty good. I mean, I know what I need to do, but it has taken a while to do it.
How large are the files? How large is a typical file you should?
Yes, it can get up into the, after all's done, and the sort of the collateral damage on your hard drive can be in the hundreds of megabytes, but not terabytes per file. I mean, it's manageable within. I didn't bring my notebook today. A very rare instance of that backpack not having my notebook in it, but I have everything I've ever done on a single.
Inspired by the talk about making computer music, because the cut and paste, it's something I'm very familiar with, and There's software now where you just make little loops and you just play the loops in different order to make a composition, things like that. And then I started thinking about how my own digital projects, they all look the same. Whenever I make a website, it looks exactly like the previous website because I just bring over the same style sheets, the same basic HTML and everything, and then there's fancy stuff in the middle. And I was kind of wondering, like I said, this is open-ended and not directed, about the possibility of one of the things that the digital might bring is a kind of its immense reproducibility gives it an opportunity for reproducibility and a sort of deadening of scholarship, because it doesn't. You're not starting every single project in the same way. You have a template that you kind of, or maybe just I do. You have a template that you already build into, and you're not challenging those initial assumptions anymore. So, I don't know.
It was directed to music, so I don't know.
Well, not necessarily. It was undirected.
It was definitely not directed.
Thank you.
You can answer it in a meta fashion.
Not only to be difficult and provocative, but in terms of scholarship, we know how to kill scholarship. And that is to, run graduate students through years and years of turning them into scholars that we are like, and teaching them how to create articles, and then printing those articles on paper, even if you're turning them into PDFs, into formats that are really, really hard to reuse, and putting them under, intellectual property regimes that make them really, really hard to share and to actually do anything with. And we're being told, are we allowed to iterate over them and to do automatic processing? So if the worry is about death, we're already there. And so digital is what's going to free and allow people to reuse things. Of course, there's a risk of copying, and the worst case is, the paper farms that undergraduates, I hope only undergraduates, are going to and, trying to turn in as their own work. I think that's an extreme example of what you're saying. But no, I'm not. I think that reproducibility is only one aspect of what one can do with digital things. One can actually transform it into other products, and that's where a lot of the interest lies. So it's not to totally say that that it's not a valid concern, but I am more concerned that we already know how to kill scholarship, and that's by turning it into refereed journals in print-based, refereed articles in print-based journals. But I'm happy to be told that that's somewhere between naive and ridiculous.
Or cynical.
What's that?
Slightly cynical.
Or cynical? Yeah, sure.
And optimistic.
I'll take a slightly different tack on the matter, a historical parallel, so to speak. One of the monuments of early printing is called the Nuremberg Chronicle. It's a history of civilization. It has a lot of woodcuts in it, illustrating different cities, among other things. Surprisingly, Jerusalem looks a lot like Genoa, and Genoa looks a lot like Marseille, and so on. In other words, people have been doing this for quite a long time, this reproducibility. I think that's worth bearing in mind from the historical perspective. Did that dumb down in the period when this book was produced? Did it cause undesirable consequences? I'm not able to comment, but I think it's a question worth thinking about as regards your own point. And that's not alone, by the way. There was other reproducibility of that sort going on.
As you were talking, I was thinking about learning how to make maps with different kinds of software, but also using map templates that other people have already produced. And that, in a way, actually can make scholarship more precise because you're not borrowing somebody else's map. You can make your own. And I think that kind of use of reproduction of someone else's work then actually is something that furthers, at least it furthers scholarship, and it furthers a kind of really pointed argument. Right.
Oh, I have so many thoughts. It's such a rich topic, really. But one strategy that I've used and that I see a lot of that actually has historically been glorified with the name, glitch technology, is specifically looking for, the rays of light in terms of creative provocation from a technology that encourages easy replicability. So you can cut and paste, and after doing it for 7 hours, you're going to get weary, you're going to make a mistake, something's not going to be aligned, and it's possibly going to sound fantastic. Something that violates rules of syntax or something, and it might be something that you then can capitalize on. Something Thelma just said made me think that digitization in the humanities and in art forms also encourage more easy collaboration. And the whole idea of the single author on a creative work is increasingly, if you're open to challenging that, and I think it makes it easy. You could write a piece that you could be cutting and pasting, and then your collaborator could look at it and replace one of those with something from his or her cut and paste, and you could have some interesting result through the sharing. And it also, one other thought that occurred to me in response to Gerald's comments, there's a lot of musical repertoire in which the syntax of the time was far more restricted, or what one of my colleagues called today in a class affordances, the affordances of the composers to use the range of styles or syntaxes that were allowed. If you think about the classical style, Mozart, for example, as a paradigm, there were a lot of composers using a relatively limited syntax. What makes a particular piece stand out, or what makes a particular composer seem to have more agility with a body of rules that seem, if you analyze them, especially digitally, they'll seem, it'll be quite challenging to point to exactly where the kind of creative edge comes from, or where, put your finger on it. There have been a lot of, going back to David Cope is an important example of an academic who experienced a writer's block, so going back like 20 or 30 years now, and he wrote code to emulate his creative style and generate new pieces. And he did taste tests with audiences to see if they could tell whether he wrote the piece, a human wrote the piece, or was it Chopin, or was it the computer? And I don't remember the statistical outcome of the tests. I actually didn't find that interesting, but the whole process was designed to look for the sources of creativity. And also, I think we're now at a point where we're also looking to understand the audience reaction. What do we care so much about knowing who the composer was, or how are we using music? How are we thinking about music? The whole digital revolution has opened up a lot of questions that are rife for scholars, musicologists, and I think the more we talk amongst ourselves across the fields, we'll become more sensitized to issues and implications of what we're doing with the digitization.
Yeah, I think just kind of growing up in the digital age, I, speaking for myself, feel kind of entitled to this information. And I'm just wondering if your students are as interested in delving into all the different angles of how things look. Do they think that that's kind of a novel type of scholarship, or is that something that we just assume is there? I don't know if the question makes sense.
I thought it was a great question. So I sort of introduce a different kind of technological approach to the material in each lecture. But I don't actually, and students are often quite amazed at things that they see, but I don't have that many students who want to learn how to do this, who want to do it, incorporate it into their own work. And I don't know why that is, actually. Maybe because it hasn't been done regularly, or frequently before. I don't know.
Right. And I think it's kind of hard for myself to really understand how these programs are developed because they've always just been there. And so I wonder about the sustainability of this type of scholarship with people who have always lived in a digital world, just because are we going to really want to dive into it as deeply as people who understand, first of all, the tangible scholarship and then moving to a digital platform? I'm just interested, I guess, in the future and where all of this leads.
It's a great question.
It is.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question. I think my approach is at any one time, yes, we exist in a particular computational environment. That means, by which I mean we have open source tools, easy to acquire tools that can iterate over data. I am interested in teaching students how to collect and represent their area of study in a way that can be, usefully put into our digital friends here, and then iterate it over and get something back that is interesting. And so at any one time, I want them to be able to be in command of current tools. I have a student over there I dragged through our studio last semester with much head banging late at night, I'm sure. Our studio is not going to be where all the cool kids are doing things in a year and a half from now. I hope that my students are able to evaluate the tools that come out, but still have a core of data that they can move forward, and so not lose that. I don't know if that's an exact answer to your question, but yeah, my focus is on data representation, and then in the long term and contemporary, constantly with myself, iteration over that using whatever tools are available. So getting students to understand that cycle and to be scholars who can engage in that cycle. I leave it to one of them who's sitting in their room who can tell you whether I'm having any success whatsoever, but don't ask her to answer that right now. That's not fair.
Again, I'll put a library spin on what I'm going to say. And you asked specifically about students. My interaction with students is they want to know how to find things. Okay, that's the big issue, and that kind of makes sense when you think about the role librarians have interacting with anyone who uses libraries. I was teaching a class just today, an undergraduate general education class, where the instructor wanted me to come in and give them some basics for their research papers that are going to be due in a few weeks. And most of the questions I got during the class period were about discovery issues, findability issues, like, do I put quotation marks around a phrase if I want to look for just this phrase? Does it work in this database that you showed us? Does it work in all the tools you showed us? How do I do exclusionary searches? So it's certain terms that I put in are not going to be retrieved in the information, that sort of stuff. That's normally what we encounter, or at least a large part of what we encounter. It's discovering the information.
I wanted to come back to the question of discoverability, reproducibility, because that is, in fact, limited by time. So we say something may be very reproducible now, but this broken book site is gorgeous. 50 years from now, will it be available? Will the scholarship be available? Will the images be available? Will we be able to see them and use them? And in mathematics and the sciences, there is a field of study called reproducibility. The idea is that if you can repeat an experiment now multiple times, we say, I'm oversimplifying obviously, but mathematically or scientifically speaking, we say, okay, then we can prove something because we can repeat it. But if that experiment relies on computational methods, on software and hardware, what about 50 years from now or 500 years from now? Is it reproducible? So there's another side to the concept of reproducibility that Sebastian's alluded to, but I would ask, like you mentioned also, Thelma, about your images.
Yeah. I have the same set of questions, and I also I don't really feel, because I'm just playing with these right now, I don't feel any kind of connection, or I'm not wedded to any particular technique. But I do find it really useful when you can use photographs that are also, and the digital photographs may not last either, but that can also be used in some other program.
I can't quite decide whether I'm taking a big risk or not, but so I don't know how much people know about RTI, but Thelma saved some of the process. It is worth engaging in conversations with students, with all of us, in a process like RTI, what ought to be archived. And I think it's I can offer perhaps a positive answer, direct, I think easy to say yes to answer to part of it. The original photographs as taken by that setup, those are directly and absolutely part of your archive.
Right.
And I don't know if CHI encourages people to actually save those, or if they encourage people to, but you get out of that, you get a big blob, big digital blob. And so, but RTI ought to be saving, and I say this somewhat as an outsider to the technique, the original pictures that are taken by those cameras. And do you have those?
Yeah.
And are they're all right there?
They're all there, but what do I do with them? That's a lot of pictures.
Hand them over to the Faculty Digital Archive here. Yeah. But I think what is harder is to make it absolutely reproducible, so that if you're saying if you manipulate this RTI thing, you see the weave right here, to make it so that somebody's 50 years from now is going to have the same computer. We're all going to move to quantum computing. I don't know what that means for rounding digits in rounding floating point numbers, which is going to produce a radically different looking thing, or a different sound in your music as it comes out. So there are basic things for people to understand. As soon as the data is created, that's what you archive. But it still is harder to archive functionality, the iteration over it of the RTI magic wheel that you were moving things around to get different angles. That still remains very, very hard.
And I don't know whether we need that information in 50 years, actually.
We digitize not just our data, but we want, as Dina was saying, reproducible research is a meme right now. The ability for that I can write something in RStudio, and 100 lines of code in RStudio, and put them on GitHub along with the data, and somebody else can do the exact same thing and decide whether I did a good job, but also improve it. Incrementally improve it. So reproducible research and improvable research. But that relies on OSX working and RStudio working. And I don't mean to be dropping too many jargon and things like that, but we're not completely there yet. Except I also pointed to the librarians, and I sort of occasionally ask librarians, what's the oldest record in the NYU library system that we could still go on Bobcat and find right now? Do you think?
Pop quiz.
But it must be 50 years old by now?
Yeah, probably going back to the 70s.
Yeah, so somebody keyed in something in the 70s, and that is now a click away from us right now. Yeah. So there's hope. When somebody cared. But I don't know how many millions of dollars have been spent on that one record, whatever. A whole lot of institutional initiative has been spent on that. So we don't have complete answers, but there's both hope, there are problems, all these kinds of things. And I don't claim to have said anything original whatsoever.
I want us to get just one final question to leave you a bit of time to have some wine as well after this. So if we can go to the final question.
I work as a digital archivist, and I have to say that all the questions that you're asking just is like the sweet music of job security to me, because we're going to have to be working out emulation systems to be able to configure things as the way that they were in 2015 in the future. Anyway, the question that I have, which is kind of a broader digital humanities question, is I wonder sometimes how much scholarship questions are determined by the tools that we have, and how much we're wondering about things after we see how a particular software or other kind of tool works, and if that's okay.
I think it's exciting, actually, because there are so many new ways to look at things. And so that's why I like to play with this and to experiment and to see what comes out. This is not leading to anything concrete at this point. It's just thinking.
I think, yes. I mean, in this sort of 3D world, there are a lot of people who have taken NASA information about sun, where the sun is, and projected it over sites and said, oh, the shadow cast there, and isn't that cool? And that's only because they can. You know, it's because that data is available. But that's not new. I mean, we've been constrained. You know, books are a technology, and we educate our children how to use them, and they turn out to be really bad for searching, but good for reading in bed, whatever it is. We have been constrained by our technology, by our access to data constantly, and are constantly trying to work, and more or less consciously. I just think we're much more aware of it now, but we should project back, 100 years, and we laugh at the scholarship that people did. And that's not entirely true. That's overstating it. We should expect to be laughed at in 100 years because of the tools that we have now and how they're so blatantly constraining what it is we are able to do. But that's okay. If I can misplace an apostrophe, I can be laughed at in 100 years. It's really okay.
Yes, I do think to an extent the technology drives the questions, and again, this is nothing new. It goes back to antiquity. The Iliad and the Odyssey have 24 books each. That's an artificial division that came about in the Alexandrian library, 2nd or 3rd century BCE, when the material was being copied onto papyrus rolls, which by that time were standardized. So you could fit only so much material on a roll. When you got so much material on a roll, you said, this is the end of book 12. Start the next roll. Beginning of book 13. Okay? These are artificial distinctions, but they have driven how we think about Homer, how we think about his poetry. Just one example among many of where the technology basically helps to drive the question.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether folded into your question was a lament about the lack of clarity of the premises that are driving the methods of archival, but I just thought of the MP3 as maybe that's a modern example of the. But unlike piano rolls or the ancient, the book size limitation, it's not really driven by practical constraints. It's driven by some other set of industry convenience, but. If we archive using our MP3s, we lose 85% of the materiality of the object, and it's not ever recoverable. And so I think that's, I don't know where that fits into the conversation, but I think that's important for sound archivists to know. And one other just data point, there's a number of international efforts that are research groups that are looking at how to archive music software where compositions have been written using software that's temporally evolving. So code that was written for creative projects based in the 70s or the 80s or the 90s, a lot of it is using software that doesn't exist anymore. So some of the composers themselves, even they themselves are now working on how can they want their pieces played, but their pieces can't be, phone is vibrating. Their pieces can only be played if the software can be reconstructed. So moving forward, that's a challenge for librarians, archivists.
Thank you. And I just want to point again to something you said earlier, Elizabeth, that idea of the misuse of technology. I love the idea of this golf game or whatever it is being turned into a compositional machine, and the misuse of technologies is such a liberating and creative pursuit. I thought it was a really beautiful example that you gave of that. Thank you all very much for coming, and I'd like to thank our 4 speakers again for coming from the far-flung corners, really, of NYU to be with us here tonight, and we invite you all to have a glass of wine outside with us afterwards. Thank you.